says 11 a.m. Good morning. I am Barbara Fiske, and I am happy to be here with you in our fellowship hall and on live stream. Today it is my great pleasure to welcome to our Cedarfield Forum, where we are going to take a journey through the fascinating history of one of Richmond's most cherished landmarks. Our speaker has dedicated years to studying and preserving the stories that make the Valentine such an essential part of our community. J. Bill Martin is a respected historian and curator with extensive experience in museum studies and public history. His work has focused on uncovering the layers of Richmond's past, connecting the city's art, architecture, and people through the lens of the Valentine's evolving role. The Valentine has contributed numerous exhibits, educational programs, publications, and tours that highlight how the Valentine has shaped and been shaped by the community around it. If you ever have been a visitor, you can gain not only a deeper appreciation for the Valentine's collections, but also for the stories of the individuals who built, supported, and sustained it for 125 years. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Bill Martin, who will share with us the rich and inspiring history of the Valentine through stories. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. She's doing my presentation for me, which is great. Bill Martin, it is such a joy to be with you today and talk a little bit about this special place in downtown. I may actually at some point just use the handheld because I have a problem. I just move too much. But I'll try to stay at the mic. It has been my privilege to be at the Valentine as its director. Are we okay now? Yeah, we're fine. We're fine. It's been my privilege to be at the Valentine for 31 years as the director. And certainly in those 31 years, there have been remarkable changes both at the institution, but also in our city. And so for today, I thought it would be interesting to look at it. Last year, we celebrated our 125th anniversary. And I want to think about what that really means. Because where did the Valentine come from? One of the things that's interesting is really about our origin story. Who are the Valentine family? Anyone, before I go any further, any Valentine family members in the room before I say something embarrassing? I always try to do that because you never know who might be in the room. The Valentines were an interesting family. They come to Richmond prior to the Civil War, and the original generation of Valentines, one of them was appointed the prison guard at the state penitentiary. Pretty lucrative job because what he did is he set up a retail business inside the prison and made a lot of money. That dry goods business got moved from the prison to Broad Street, and he continued to develop a sense of community, and he sent, as many of us do, sent his kids to Europe to study art. Now, and the dates are interesting for that because they go from 1858 to 1865. They avoided the Civil War entirely. And yet, Valentine, one of those Valentine sons, comes back to Richmond and becomes the sculptor of the Civil War monuments. So it's an interesting story. Terrible things. If you send your children to Europe, what happens? They come back with ideas about being artists. That's a problem. And the other thing that they came back with a notion that Richmond, to be a great city, needed a great museum. And Richmond did not have one. And so taking the resources from the prior to the Civil War, but also inventing a product, and we'll see how many people have ever had it. How many people have ever had a little dose of Valentine's meat juice? Oh my gosh, okay, it was delicious. No, it was horrible. It was horrible, but this was a tonic developed by the Valentine family members. After the Civil War, one of the Valentine brothers, the wife was sick. Husband went in the basement, cooked up this thing. She drank it, she got better, she told her friends, and ultimately this product was sold all over the world. And they did really well with it. This is our founder. And these are those 7 brothers that become the leadership of the museum in the early years. And that's mom and dad and sister in the background. So they come back from Europe. They come back from Europe and they start collecting. And they bring stuff back, lots. You know, there's such an interesting difference between, is it a hoarder or a collector? I'm not sure in this case. I'm not sure in this case because they collected everything. They did archaeological digs across the state. They collected objects from all over the country, and they bought a house in downtown called the Wickham House, and they stuffed it with all of their things. And that's the beginning of the museum. 26 years ago, we opened to the public, but we're founded much, much earlier. And so over the years, we have collected and collected and collected. And so what I thought we might do today is sort of look at what have we collected, what are the things, the objects that have been added to the collection. And so it is everything. It is everything. And I will tell you that we've just finished the most elaborate process over the last decade. When we started this process, we had 1.6 million objects. How does that compare to the Virginia Museum? Anyone have any idea how many objects are in the Virginia Museum collection? Little over 50,000. In our costume and textile collection, we have, I always love to do this with Alex Nurges, the director at the VMFA. We have more costumes and textiles and quilts in our collection than there are objects in the entire Virginia Museum. That requires the same level of paperwork. And so what we decided to do is, for the first time, a complete inventory of everything we owned to make sure that what we were storing really related to the city and our history. And it was a remarkable, remarkable process. Every single dress, every single photograph, every single piece of furniture in the collection was evaluated, documented, and most of it is now online. It is a remarkable project. So what we did in addition is we added a new building. So there's a 3-story addition, quiet little building that's been added to the back of the Valentine. Didn't touch the garden, let's make sure, did not touch the garden, but just added to the rear of the building, and we added new storage. Nothing glamorous about a big closet, except that if you're an archivist, if you're a curator, we now have this most remarkable collections facility. So when you're doing research, everything is in a special environment, and everything is well cared for, and we know where everything is. That is an incredible project over the last few years. And so what's in this collection? Well, we have to start with the Wickham House. It's, in many ways, the Wickham House is the largest object in the museum collection. Built in 1812 by John and Elizabeth Wickham. Wickham is an interesting, and there's lots of discussion these days around the 250th and what to do with the Declaration of Independence and that celebration. Well, we love Wickham because he's the contrarian. What do you do with Wickham, who at the age of 16 comes to visit his uncle from Boston? He's in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson is the governor, and he puts this young 16-year-old under house arrest because he's a loyalist. He thought the revolution was a terrible idea. That's a story we never talk about, and yet a very large percentage of the people who lived in Richmond at the time of the revolution thought it was a bad idea. And so for us, we're going to do a deeper dive into Wickham, to his family, to what his politics were. What we've been discovering are some really interesting things. Most of the Quakers in Richmond were opposed to the revolution. Large numbers in the German community were opposed to the revolution. If you're a major slaveholder in Richmond, you're opposed to the revolution. And so for us, the Wickham House over the next 4 or 5 years will be this really interesting opportunity to do a deep dive into this important period in American history. You know, Richmonders love to talk about the Civil War. We just do. But in fact, the most important period we think at the Valentine is that period from 1780 to 1820, when the capital moves from Williamsburg to Richmond, and think everything that's happening here. Jefferson's statute for religious freedom. If you are a Baptist or a Methodist, you should be grateful because you wouldn't be able to exist in Virginia prior to the statute for religious freedom. It tells us a lot because in 1786, we also see that Richmond has a very large Jewish community. 1 in every 8 men in Richmond in 1800 were Jewish. Why? Because we had one of the largest Jewish communities because it was accepted in Virginia as part of the statute for religious freedom. That's a big idea. It's an important idea for us. So we've got lots of things that we can do with the house. And I will just tell you that we are about to start a new program to actually, it's been 35 years, and it's been 35 years since we touched the house. And we get to start over because after 35, 40 years, I think we all need a refresh, right? We all need a little refresh, and so we're going in and doing some fresh research on the house and learning so much more about what the house was. One of the things that's going to be very exciting / disappointing in the research is that I know that the colors that the house was painted 40 years ago are all wrong. There's new research. You know, research always finds new things, and so we'll be rethinking the entire house over the next decade. Great house, an amazing house, and today 90% of the contents of the house are Wickham furniture. So we've been able to, over the last decade or two, bring much of the original furniture back into the house with dealing, particularly I will just tell you that COVID was not a bad thing for us when it came to furniture because many people downsized, and that downsized furniture was perfect, was part of the legacy of the house. Much of that Wickham furniture returned to the Valentine during COVID. Really interesting to see the house. So you'd have to come see the new, improved version. The other object is Edward Valentine's studio. Buildings have to be considered as objects because they require special care. And so Valentine's studio has been a particularly interesting challenge for the Valentine over the last few years because Edward Valentine was a sculptor. was a sculptor that created many of the monuments that we see on Monument Avenue, but also, believe it or not, in our collection, we have 800 statues by Edward Valentine. And they were all created in this little building. And so over the last few years, we've been working to make sure the studio tells this really interesting story about this artist and his belief and the critical role that he played in creating, and we can talk a little bit about this later, but how does Richmond become Richmond? A lot of it is because of the artist's work that is supporting the lost cause narrative, and we can talk about that a little bit. This is what the Lee statue should have looked like, because this is the actual statue that our founder made. Edward Valentine worked with Mrs. Lee and the family, but this one was never executed. Why? Because instead of using a local artist, when the Lee group came together to build the Lee Monument, they did an international competition. And Valentine was insulted. He goes, I know Mrs. Lee, I've worked on the Lee family, I created the recumbent Lee for the chapel, I am the best artist for this. And they said no. So he didn't compete. And so we do have this wonderful version of Lee that is really the perfect likeness of Lee. And his work is remarkable. This was actually shown at the Chicago World's Fair. It's just incredible work, and I hope that you'll come down and see the studio because we've really done an amazing job with it. But there's our costume, but there's more. There's our costume collection, and it is everything. From this 18th century dress worn at Westover, and just imagine the kind of conservation and care something like this requires. This was recently exhibited, and for us, each dress we have to make a custom mannequin for, because it's not about going out and buying a mannequin, it is about actually constructing something that will save the dress from gravity. And so custom-made mannequins with this particular dress required significant conservation, and the conservator took over 6 months to work on this dress, about $7,000 of time and labor to make sure that the dress could actually be exhibited. And imagine if you have 50,000 dresses, and all of them require some attention. It's a big treasure that we have, and the Valentine now is one of the few history museums in the country that has a significant costume and textile collection because they are so expensive to maintain. There are only just a couple, one in Chicago, one in Atlanta, and certainly the Costume Institute at the Met. But these collections are extremely rare, requiring special staff. And yet, we keep growing. This is an applique quilt, again from Westover Plantation, sort of a detail of an applique quilt. It's not a wedding dress. It's a party dress, worn 1824 when Lafayette came to Richmond as part of his grand tour. It's pretty sheer, isn't it? Well, you know, we forget, again, when we look at that 1780, 1820 period, women's fashion was almost as crazy as the politics. Because all those bustles and hoops, all those things that we know from the colonial era disappear, and women are going out like this. Very little undergarments under it. It's a radical period in American history that's pretty unlike anything we've seen. It's also about mourning dresses like this one. Again, worn in Richmond, 1865, at the end of the Civil War, because women in Richmond had the responsibility of remembering the South. Imagine being in a city where there were more hospital beds and prison beds than there were beds for the living. and your husband maybe doesn't come back from the war, or your husband is disabled, and you are the person responsible, not only for the children, but for creating the story that makes it make sense. And that's what happens in Richmond. This dress is a reminder. It's quilts. We have so many quilts, lots of quilts, nothing like a good crazy quilt. It's a boy, little Lloyd Fauntleroy. I will tell you, I know that many of you might have Sarah Sue hats. Don't call me. We have so many Sarah Sue hats in our collection because everyone, that was anyone in Richmond, had a Sarah Sue hat. And so it's a great collection of hats. It's children's clothes. It's just about everything, including police uniforms and this amazing Balmain dress made couture for a Richmonder. I think that at the center of our collection, the most important part of our collection are our photographs. Incredible images of the city, and I can now tell you that we know that we have over 1 million discrete images. That's an amazing collection. We have the Richmond Times-Dispatch, part of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Colonial Studio, Cook, all the Style magazine, about 100,000 photographs from Style magazine. So it is an incredible reference for the city. This is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, photograph of the city of Richmond, taken from Church Hill. And in the background, you can see the Capitol. Or again, you can see the glass plates because you can see cracks in the plate. But the MCV, the Egyptian building from the 1840s. To this photograph of the Capitol taken right after the Civil War. Not the Capitol we know today, is it? The wings were added in 1910, and as were the front steps. So this is the Capitol that Jefferson imagined. No front steps. The actual entrances to the Capitol were on the side. To a photograph of the burned district in Richmond after the Civil War. I always love this photo, not because because it has this really interesting hint to what Richmond's economy was. If you look off to the side, you'll see a little sign that says tea and coffee. When we think about the economy of Richmond in the years before the Civil War, we think about tobacco and slavery. We don't always talk about flour and grain. On the river in Richmond was the largest flour mill in the country, maybe the world. Those barrels were being made in Richmond, cedar barrels, filled with flour and being shipped into Central and South America. Those barrels were coming back with something in them, coffee. And so, believe it or not, Richmond was one of the larger coffee roasting centers. I guess we could have been Seattle, maybe, I don't know. Elizabeth Van Loo's house, a house that's gone today up on Church Hill, famous Union spy, ran a spy network out of the basement of the house. We've now got new information. I always, when I gave this talk in the past, would say, because of her politics, the house was demolished after the Civil War because she became the postmistress of the city, and she was known as Crazy Bet, and I just assumed that they took her house down because of that. Well, it's not. The house was sold from her estate and was purchased by a tuberculosis clinic. And so it served as a sanitarium, and we actually just bought the original sanitarium sign because it's a really interesting story. And so the neighbors thought it was a terrible idea for the sanitarium to be located in Church Hill. And so they ran the guy out of business, and then they tore the building down. To a photograph like this one, the first integrated jury ever impaneled in Virginia. While the trial didn't move forward, this is the group that was seated for the trial of Jefferson Davis. It's an incredible, incredible image and really rare. or this photograph that is in every textbook in the country. This is a parade. It's Emancipation Day, and it is Shockoe Bottom. And this is a black family in front of their business in Shockoe Bottom celebrating Emancipation Day with a banner of Lincoln hanging from the front porch. Really remarkable, because these parades, while they happen frequently after the Civil War, by the time we get to the 1890s, thereabouts, all of the celebrations related to emancipation are shut down as Jim Crow laws become put in place. Any Baptists in the room? No. Okay, just, you have to confess a little bit. Again, amazing. This is the first Baptist church, 1886. Why? Because of the Statute for Religious Freedom. And in this one church, you can begin to see the history of the Baptist faith in Virginia, because the Baptist church split over the issue of slavery. So the white congregation moved one block away and established First Baptist, and this becomes First African Baptist Church. Really remarkable, because it was Maggie Walker's church and a variety of others. But not everyone lived in grand houses in Richmond. And so those photographs that we have really tell all of these stories. You will win a prize if you know where this is. If you look at the top of the trash heap, that's the White House of the Confederacy. That's VCU. We drive through this all the time, because when they were constructing I-95, this trash heap was there. They built I-95 through it. What we also know is that under this trash heap was the African burial ground. It's about work. Gosh, we always talk about the heroes. What about folks that just work? Work in factories, work in the ironworks, women who lead important efforts for voting. Or this dear person who drove a bus while her husband was away at war, World War II, and the moment he came back, she went back home, and he got his job back. It's Monument Avenue without monuments. This is 1890. And it's really that early block, and I bet one of the surprises for folks is the first 2 blocks of Monument Avenue were all Jewish owners, because it was close to Beth Ahaba, the synagogue that was located right there. And so we've documented in every way possible the monuments and statues, but it's also about Capitol Square and flower markets. Again, this is just this remarkable resource that researchers, scholars, students come every single day to do a deep dive into this remarkable collection. You name it, there is a photograph of it in the Valentine. And when someone says Shockoe Bottom doesn't flood, we can prove that it doesn't matter what flood wall you build, it's going to flood. And so what else do we have in the collection beyond our photographs, which are, again, just kind of wonderful? Forest Hill? Anyone live in Forest Hill? The roller coaster in Forest Hill Park. At the end of every trolley line in Richmond would have been something. So if you'd taken the trolley line out towards Lewis Ginter, where Lewis Ginter is today, that would have been a velodrome. There was a bike track there. There was a zoo there. If you took the trolley over to Forest Hill, that would have been an amusement park. If you'd taken the trolley out to West Ham, that would have been the University of Richmond. At the end of each trolley line, there would have been something, an attraction, because each trolley line, today we think they were all public, each trolley line was actually owned by the developer. Who do you think would buy all the trolley lines? All purchased all at once. Virginia Power. Because each of those trolley lines would have had their own generating plant. And so it's going to be much more efficient for Dominion to build power plants on the river and provide the power for all the trolley lines. So initially, all the trolley lines at one point were all owned by Virginia Power. Just your trivia for today. There's also the Civil War. This is the centennial of the Civil War, 1960. Downtown, everyone's forgotten the space-age domed building, although it was sitting along the interstate, but it was an amazing celebration. And sometimes, you know, it's just fun. But what else do we have? A large collection of Virginia Indian material. I will tell you that one of the biggest challenges for the Valentine over the last few years is that we had a lot of human remains from burials, from Indian burial mounds across the state. In fact, over 100 bodies. I am happy to tell you today that there's everything in our collection that needs to be repatriated to Virginia's tribes have been returned. A massive undertaking with reburials of human remains, sacred objects, religious objects have all been returned. And as you know, if you read the paper, this is a big issue for museums across the country when they discover things in their collection that really are culturally sensitive, particularly related to human remains and burials. And so we're really happy that that's been part of this process. But it's everything from amazing tables like this one made for the Wickhams by Lanuay. The great thing about this table is it has its label on it, and we know that we have a pair of them, and it was made for Wickham for our house in downtown. It's everyday things, and I think that that's part of the specialty of what the Valentine does, is that it's the everyday thing. Great silversmiths created silver in Richmond. Today we have every silversmith that ever worked in the city represented in the collection, and there are lots of them. Yeah, we might have made a little whiskey too. To silversmiths, to objects like this one that remind us of the central role that slavery played in our city, to a punch bowl that was probably at one of those slave house auctions because it was from a hotel in downtown. Or this object, a flogger used in one of the slave jails in downtown. We don't show the side of this that has the nails exposed. Or a ballot box used right after the Civil War to establish voting. Or weird things, guys. You know, every day, after 30 years, I still see strange new things and surprises in the collection. This is one of them. When Lee was installed on Monument Avenue, a group of children were recruited to pull the cart from the train station to Monument Avenue. When it was done, the rope was cut into little pieces, and each child got a portion of that rope. And each rope had a special commemorative ribbon. I didn't realize we have a lot of this in our collection. Kind of an odd object, right? But tells this interesting story. Or doorstop. Or signs. We have so many signs, neon, you name it. A great toy collection. Then we continue to add to our toys, to an object that I'm sure we will talk about today. Probably the most controversial object that we've added to our collection. This is Jefferson Davis from Monument Avenue. Why is it at the Valentine? It was created in the studio in our garden at the Valentine. It was about to be sold. The Valentine intervened, purchased the statue to save it, and it is at the Valentine. All the others are sitting on an island, and we're not sure what will happen there. But of all the statues in the city that were toppled in 2020, this is the only one that we can guarantee is saved. and it is at the Valentine. Now you're saying, why is it in that position? Because we have a lot of Edward Valentine's work, but the 2020 history is also important. And I don't think anyone in the room will say that 2020 was a year that changed a lot of things and was an important event, whether we like it or not, in Richmond history. And so we are at this point saving it for the future. I'm sure it is now in, this statue will travel more than anyone. Today it is exhibited in LA at the Museum of Contemporary Art. It will go from the Museum of Contemporary Art to the Uffizi in Florence, where it will be exhibited there, and then from the Uffizi it will go to the National Museum in London. It is an important object that tells us an important story, and we can talk more about that during questions. It's got amazing paintings like this one. This is one of the earliest views of the city up the river. The Capitol's not even the centerpiece of the painting. It's far off to the left, up in a hill. To varieties of paintings. This is Mrs. Marks. The Marks family were in the silversmiths. They were silversmiths. That's not real hair because she was Orthodox and her hair would have been shaved and there would have been sort of added hair. To James Armistead Lafayette. Again, one of our treasures in this collection. James Armistead was a slave who was hired out of Richmond during the American Revolution, infiltrated Cornwallis's troops, and was a spy, and brought all that intelligence back to Washington and Lafayette. We won at Yorktown because of this guy. The intelligence and the intelligence that he provided back. So you would think that if you've done that, you've been given your freedom. He was not. He pleaded and pleaded. And finally in 1824, when Lafayette came back to this country, you saw the dress earlier, the General Assembly of Virginia finally gave him his freedom. And this portrait was painted in honor of that. And this is an interesting thing. When Lafayette enters the city, sitting on the welcoming platform was John Marshall and James Armistead Lafayette. What a scene that might have been, right? To this painting that's not in our collection, but one that's interesting because it depicts the slave trade in Richmond. It's a freight car that's being loaded right, if we know where the Federal Reserve Building is today, there's a train station there. In the 1840s, 1850s, and you can still see it. There's a stone pilings across the river. That was an early railroad bridge. So Richmond had industrial development long before the Civil War, and part of that industrial development was tied to its connections to the slave trade. And John Marshall, again, we don't talk enough about John Marshall. If you love and hate the Supreme Court today, you can thank him or do whatever you'd like to, because if you think about judicial review, if you think about separation of powers, the three branches of government, much of that was invented, particularly judicial review. It's not in the Constitution. It was a product of the Marshall Court. Amazing, and it's happening right here in Richmond, Virginia, because at that point, cases were assigned to a judge, and the cases were actually tried in Richmond. So what's the most famous John Marshall trial in Richmond? Aaron Burr. We're going to slip back. Who was Aaron Burr's attorney? Remember that trader we talked about earlier, John Wickham, built our house? John Wickham was Aaron Burr's attorney. Now, I'll tell you that there's an easy way we do things in downtown, it appears, is there was a famous dinner where John Marshall, Aaron Burr, and Wickham had dinner. Might have had a drink or two, and by the time it was over, Aaron Burr was acquitted. Some things may not change. to this wonderful painting, again, a new painting for us, Aunt Betsy, who was a former slave of the Wickham family, to advertising of all kinds, prints, engravings, views of the city, monumental church, and again, I don't want to go too long today. I'm going to about to get the. I have 10 minutes. You're in trouble. 10 minutes. So you have something like this monumental church. Anyone been to Monumental Church? It's an amazing building. Robert Mills built, and I would suggest that second only to Jefferson's Capitol, that in terms of American architecture, Monumental Church is the second most important building in the city in terms of American architecture. Designed as a crypt, as a tomb for those who died in the Richmond Theater fire. Again, we're back to that 1780, 1820 period, right? That's when things happen, when great architecture is established, great laws are passed, and great buildings like this one are constructed. There are over 80 people buried here in the crypt below those who died in the Richmond Theater fire. So it's a really interesting combination of memorial site, a religious site, and great architecture. And if you ever get a chance to go into the building, it is really worth that extra effort. And if you ask really tenderly, you can go down and see the crypt, which is the best part. Monuments everywhere, and this evacuation photograph, this etching by Curry and Ives of the evacuation of the city. Again, the broad range of object types in this collection are incredible. Every day discovering something, discovering a new story. When I arrived at the Valentine, no one talked about this story. No one in the city talked about this story. No one really knew that Lincoln came to Richmond. At the end of the Civil War, he and son are in City Point. They're on a small boat. They get stuck on a sandbar right up the river. And for children today, it's easy to know where they stopped because it's right where Bottoms Up Pizza is. So I always imagine Todd coming out of the river with his dad, walking up and going, thank goodness they have pizza. But that didn't happen. But suddenly, they're walking through the city, and there is no one to protect him. Can you imagine the President of the United States walking through Richmond, Virginia? The city is still smoldering. There are no federal troops. There's no one to protect him. And he walks through the city, walks through the center of the slave trade, up the hill to the Capitol, and ends up at the White House of the Confederacy. What an amazing moment in American history, and one that, again, sort of adds to the story. It's insurance policies, it's advertising, it's maps, amazing early maps. We actually have the 1606 map from John Smith in our collection. And so a comprehensive set of maps, annexation maps, you name it, we have it, posters of all kinds, yes, lots of tobacco-related things. And so that's what the Valentine does. We try to figure out ways to trick people into learning more about history. And today is more important than ever that we do that. And we have to think in non-traditional ways to get that work done. This year, we will do over 200 walking tours of the city, because not all the history in the city happened in our building. And to go to other places and to see where other communities are in that history, and we do that with adults, and we do that with kids. how do we, since 1902, and I'll put any other institution in the city, since 1902, the Valentine has never charged a child from the Richmond Public Schools to attend a program, ever. The thing that also makes us different is that that was for black and white kids. And so from 1902 through the 1950s, if you were a black kid in the Richmond Public Schools, the only museum that you were allowed to attend was the Valentine. So we're not as large as others, but we're mighty, mighty downtown. And that's some of the work we do. We think that it's important to connect history with community issues. And so we have a whole series called Controversy History, and what it looks at are contemporary issues through the eyes of history. So next month, what's the biggest issue in Richmond these days? Where we're going to get our water. And so an entire session looking at where we're going to get our water from, how's it going to be, how we're going to deliver safe, potable water as we've done as part of the city. Believe it or not, we have big sandstone blocks in the collection that were used to filter the water before you could use it. Every house would have had one. The most frightening thing that we have in the collection, we have the original water mains were wooden. Can you imagine? That would be really safe. And believe it or not, there are still wooden water mains that are being dug up and brought to the Valentine. And are still in use. So those are the kinds of issues that we think are important, that get new people in. We need those young people. We need those young people engaged in this history. And it's one of the big challenges for us. Do we do some weird things every once in a while? We do. I have a young staff, and I can never predict what they're going to come up with next. But again, it is our mission and to be that institution that pushes just a little bit to encourage people to think differently about themselves and their history. And so the building is now done. Clay Street is back to being this most beautiful block in downtown. The Valentine is going to be engaged in a lot of projects in the next few years to make sure that downtown is safer. Because as you know, you're going to come to downtown if it doesn't look and feel safe, and you're not going to come to the Valentine. And so the big project that we'll be working on is actually outside of the walls of the Valentine, but making sure that when you're going to the Virginia Rep or to all the theaters or to the galleries in downtown, that it looks like this place that we all want to be. Yes, we are a tattooed city. And the demographics are really interesting. So here's the challenge for the Valentine. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the population of the city of Richmond dropped below 200,000 people. Today, there are 238,000 people living in the city of Richmond. Those 38,000 people have no connection. They didn't grow up here, they weren't born here, and our job is to make sure that they love Richmond as much as we do. And so that's the challenge for the Valentine for the future, is all this new opportunity, and we are only able to do that because of the support of a lot of folks in this room. I want to thank all of you, because many of you have been supporters for a very, very long time. And with that, it probably is time for me to stop. Any questions?
Any questions? I have a question. If somebody gave you unlimited funds right now, what would be a couple of artifacts you would run out and buy if they were purchasable?
If you had all the money in the world. So one of the nice things about having an inventory, so the question is, if I had all the money in the world, what would I buy? exciting now is because of this inventory, we actually know what we don't have. And so there are certain neighborhoods that I know that I would collect things from certain neighborhoods that are not represented in the collection. There are certain, I think, we are still working, believe it or not, we're going to do a lot more 1950s, 60s, 70s, and are actually buying some things from some music things from the 1960s and 70s. Of the early stuff, the Victorian stuff is well represented in the collection. And again, it's sort of, we buy some things for the house, probably. But if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't buy anything. I'd create an endowment to support our education programs for the 50,000 kids that come every year, to make sure that we can always guarantee, because you can, as one of the early Valentine family members was Henry Valentine. Many of you may have known Henry Valentine. Henry Valentine said to me, if it's just a bunch of stuff, you should close. Because it's, can we make a difference? Can we make a difference in how children are educated? Can we make a difference in the way we feel about ourselves and how we express ourselves as a community? That's what it's about. So, yeah, I'd like to buy some stuff, but I'd also like to guarantee that the work of the Valentine is guaranteed forever, because that's the work we do is most important. That was a really bad answer, but that's what.
No, that was good.
Yes.
Any more questions? I have one. If you could think of some individuals in Richmond history that you just really think made Richmond, or maybe did more harm to Richmond than good, who comes to mind?
Who comes to mind? I think Fulmer Bright was a mayor and had real influence in terms of building much of Richmond's park system. Controversial figure, but I think much of what we see as a city is a result of his time as mayor. Who'd also be unrecognized. I think that's a good, let me think about that one. I'll have it before the end. Because, the people that we know are not the people that made the difference. The folks that I would like for us to see more about are the people who do the stuff that none of us want to do every day. The real heroes, to me, are that person who gets on the back of that trash truck and makes sure that the streets are clean. And that's been going on for a long time. When was the last time you knew the name of someone who just did the regular work? The people that we count on today, during COVID, all those Amazon drivers, maybe some of those guys are the real heroes. So that's, I wouldn't go for the person. I would go to that person who worked in the factory that made those cigarettes, that made the wealth of Richmond. Those folks who repaired the freight engines that kept travel going. Those are the stories that are often forgotten, that we all count on, that if I were choosing the stories I would really like to tell, the stories that we haven't, just the regular folk that lived in Church Hill, that walked down the hill to go to work, or that Italian family, we don't really talk about immigrants very much. And so I would probably spend a lot more time talking about Italians. Quick story, I know you're gonna go, stop. But the Italian story in Richmond is interesting because it's 1900, they're recruited, an entire village of Italians are recruited to come build the cathedral. They build the cathedral, that great stonework, and they finish the cathedral, and the bishop says, sorry, no dirty Italians in the cathedral. So they try to go to Church Hill to St. Patrick's, my neighborhood. St. Patrick's is the Irish church. Oh, no. We have actually a letter in our collection from that church to the bishop saying, please don't let the Italians come here. So they build a church, St. Elizabeth's Church, in Highland Park outside the city limits. That's an interesting story. That's an interesting story. So that's where I mean, again, sort of the regular folks and what people have done and how people have created amazing lives and amazing families despite the world is a pretty big lesson for us all right now. Yes?
Richmond is considered a foodie city. How do you think you will demonstrate that and exhibit that concept?
Richmond has always enjoyed beverage. And so we've actually documented at least beer culture has been something. So the first canned beer, aluminum canned beer, was done here in Richmond. Why? Because we had Reynolds metal. And so foodie culture is always, we've always had some really interesting food. What we're doing now with foodie culture is that we're documenting all the menus. And so once a year, we go out and collect all the menus from lots of restaurants around the community, because it's really fascinating for us now to go back and look at what the menu was at the Jefferson Hotel in 1900. What were they serving? What were they eating? And so, again, that's a part of the story that really is more important in terms of real people being interested in history. It's what do we eat? What do we wear? What do we do for fun? Those are not political. Those are just life. And that's the thing that we think's the thing that needs to be focused on right now, because that's where we need to be. Yes, sir.
Is it true that Maggie Walker was born in Van Loo's house?
Repeat the question.
The question was Maggie Walker born in Elizabeth Van Loo's house? Yes, sir. And that entire spy network was based out of that basement. Amazing stories. Maggie Walker's house on Church Hill, it is where the Bellevue School is today. I will just tell you that Bellevue School is one of our favorite schools, because we try to do something different with our schools. Again, a field trip is a field trip. That's nice, right? But for us, a field trip is this opportunity to have a longer-term engagement. So with Bellevue, that school, one of the things we've done year after year is if you walk into that school today, in their lobby, you will see a museum of the history of the school that the kids created. If you talk to the kids, they've come to the Valentine multiple times. They've used historic maps, and they're able to give you a walking tour of their neighborhood. Every year we do Museum Day at Bellevue School, and that's how you make a difference over time in kids' lives. It's not the one-hit wonder. We love field trips. But I think where we can make a difference is being in that school and in that child's classroom multiple times during the course of a year. That's when you're going to make a difference. And we know that education is in crisis. And I think that the kind of thing that the Valentine does is what kids need right now. They don't learn from a screen. I couldn't learn from a screen. And the ability to touch and feel and smell real, honest-to-goodness things honors the way most of us learn. And so when we ask why are kids falling behind, it's because everything they know is on a screen. And I'm going to tell you, you can't trust that. I have no, yes, sir.
Do you have anything about the history of the trolley system?
We do. What I really, really want, and I'm still trying to hunt it down, is the Sprague's motor. Sprague was the engineer that designed the electric motor that powered that trolley. We don't. It was at some point, it was exhibited at the Richmond Votech School, and I'm hunting it down. I'm going to find it. We have lots of other things, maps, headlamps. We don't have a trolley car, but we have all the bits and pieces of a trolley car, but also the maps and other things, tickets. It's a great story. But 1888, imagine, you know, where was the original trolley fired up? Do you know where the original power plant was? It's still there. I challenge you to go find it. It's in Churchill. It's on P Street, and it's next to the Robinson Theater on P Street. There's some things. Actually, you said if I could buy anything I wanted. If you could buy anything I wanted, I would buy that building, because that little building tells the story, so many stories, because the electric generators that fired up the first electric trolley in the country are in that building.
One last question for me, one last question. Is that the Millen Roads clock where we would meet?
That is the Millen Roads clock. When the company was sold, the employees of Millen Roads got together and bought it for the Valentine. So, meet me under the clock. And again, anytime you would like to come, just call me. No, I'm serious. Just call. And what I'd love to do in smaller groups is, if you'd like to see what our new storage looks like, I'll be happy to take small groups up, because it's really amazing to see, how do we store our costumes and textiles? How do we store all of our paintings and photography? The great news for those of you that have stuff, we now have capacity to add to the collection. For the first time, we're working with folks like the Richmond Times-Dispatch to add to our photography collection. We actually have vacant, empty racks and shelves. And we're going to keep it that way for a while. But when the perfect thing comes, we have room for it. I'm about to be moving out. I'm clearing out my house too, and it's awful, isn't it? To figure what to keep. Don't throw something out related to Richmond history without calling us. Trust me. We'll put it to use.
This morning, I would like to take 2 moments of business time and alert you that next month we will have the guest speaker, Scarlett Heinbuch, to talk about near-death experiences, hers own and others. But today, we are ever grateful to Bill Martin. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Bill will stick around for just a few moments, so if you'd like to meet him personally, please step forward. Thank you.